In the 1950s and 60s, Betty Crocker published 30 casserole recipes that changed how America cooked on tight budgets. Her cookbooks and recipe cards offered simple one-dish meals using canned soups, ground beef, and easy baking methods. Busy mothers prepared dinner in minutes instead of hours, turning pantry staples into hearty meals for the whole table. These casseroles quietly fed a generation when saving time and money mattered most. Today, we rediscover 30 forgotten Betty Crocker casseroles that once defined everyday American dinners when economy and simplicity ruled every kitchen. Salmon noodles Romanoff transformed canned salmon into elegant supper that tasted far more sophisticated than its humble ingredients suggested to anyone seated at the table. This casserole came directly from Betty Crocker's 1971 recipe card library, where it held the honored first position in the budget casseroles collection. Medium egg noodles were cooked until tender, then combined with cottage cheese and sour cream that created luxurious creaminess. Finely chopped onion and minced garlic added aromatic depth, while Worcestershire sauce and dash of red pepper provided subtle complexity. The drained salmon was folded in gently to preserve some texture. The mixture was spooned into greased baking shells or a single casserole dish, then topped with shredded sharp cheddar that melted into golden pools. The oven transformed these ordinary ingredients into something restaurant-worthy in just 25 minutes at 325 degrees. This casserole cost mere dollars to prepare since canned salmon remained affordable and the dairy products were pantry staples. The curds from cottage cheese added interesting texture that made each bite slightly different from the last. Salmon noodles Romanoff represented Betty Crocker's genius for making budget ingredients taste expensive through thoughtful combinations and proper technique that elevated the ordinary into something memorable. Tuna chow casserole brought exotic Asian flavors to American tables during an era when Chinese food represented adventure and international sophistication for families who rarely traveled beyond their hometowns. Betty Crocker published this recipe in her 1971 card collection, understanding that ordinary home cooks craved variety but needed familiar ingredients. Celery, onion, and green pepper were sauteed in butter until tender and fragrant. Canned tuna was flaked and combined with chow mein noodles, condensed cream of mushroom soup, milk, and water. The mixture was poured into a casserole dish, with reserved crispy noodles sprinkled on top to maintain their crunch. Salted peanuts added unexpected texture and nutty richness. The casserole baked for 30 minutes at 350 degrees, emerging bubbly and golden. The crispy noodles provided textural contrast to the creamy interior. The cost remained minimal since every ingredient came from cans or packages that stored indefinitely. This casserole made families feel worldly and adventurous while never leaving their own kitchens. The combination of soft noodles, crunchy topping, and creamy sauce hit multiple texture notes at once. Tuna chow mein represented international sophistication on a Depression-era budget, proving exotic flavors were accessible to everyone. Texas hash delivered Southwestern comfort in a single baking dish, combining ground beef with bold flavors that made families feel they were eating something special rather than just stretching cheap meat with rice. This Betty Crocker classic from 1971 became a weeknight staple across America, particularly in households where budgets demanded creativity. Ground beef was browned with sliced onions and chopped green pepper until the meat lost its pink color. The browned mixture was combined with canned tomatoes, uncooked rice, salt, and chili powder that provided the signature southwestern heat. The entire mixture went into a casserole dish, covered tightly with foil to trap steam. The oven did all the work at 350 degrees for 1 hour while mothers attended to other tasks. The rice absorbed the tomato juices and meat drippings, transforming into flavorful grains. This one-dish meal provided protein, vegetables, and starch in balanced proportions. The cost rarely exceeded $2 since ground beef remained affordable. The chili powder could be adjusted according to family preferences, from mild warmth to genuine heat. Texas hash proved that southwestern cooking was accessible to families far from Texas. The simplicity meant even inexperienced cooks could succeed without anxiety. Before we move
on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue.
Toasty cheese bake turned ordinary toast and hamburger into something surprisingly substantial, proving that simple ingredients combined thoughtfully could feed families well without demanding much from the cook or the budget. Betty Crocker introduced this recipe in her 1971 card collection, where it quickly became a favorite among working mothers. 8 slices of white bread were toasted until golden, then buttered on both sides to create rich foundation. Ground beef was cooked with chopped onion, celery, prepared mustard, and salt until the meat browned completely. The mixture was layered in a baking pan with a buttered toast and shredded American cheese. Beaten eggs were combined with milk, salt, pepper, and dry mustard, then poured over the assembled layers. The casserole baked for 35 minutes at 350 degrees, emerging with crispy edges and creamy center. The flavors were familiar and comforting rather than challenging or exotic. Children recognized every component and accepted it without complaint. The entire preparation cost pennies per serving since bread, hamburger, and cheese were the cheapest ingredients available. The egg custard bound everything together like savory bread pudding. Toasty cheese bake represented reliable weeknight cooking that never disappointed and always satisfied. Double Cheese Delight combined 2 types of cheese with noodles and ground beef to create casseroles so rich and satisfying that families never suspected it was designed for tight budgets. Betty Crocker understood that cheese made everything feel more luxurious, transforming cheap ingredients into something that tasted expensive. Medium egg noodles were cooked until tender, then combined with browned ground beef that had been cooked with chopped onion and celery. Tomato sauce and salt were stirred in to create savory base. Then cottage cheese and softened cream cheese were added along with sour cream. The cottage cheese curds added interesting texture while the cream cheese melted into silky sauce. The entire mixture was spooned into a casserole dish and topped with fresh tomato slices arranged in overlapping circles. The casserole baked, covered for 30 minutes at 350 degrees, emerging bubbly and golden. The tomatoes provided bright acidity that cut through the rich cheese sauce. This casserole proved that 2 inexpensive cheeses could create more luxury than one expensive variety. The creaminess felt indulgent and special. Smart combinations mattered more than costly ingredients. Families eating this casserole experienced richness and satisfaction without the price tag that usually accompanied such decadence. 5 forgotten casseroles were completed, from salmon noodles Romanoff to double cheese delight that fed families on pennies. These Betty Crocker recipes transformed canned goods and humble ingredients into proper suppers that brought dignity to budget cooking. 5 more await, each proving economy never meant eating poorly. Oven porcupines earned their playful name from the rice grains that poked through the meatballs like quills, creating casserole that delighted children while secretly delivering complete nutrition. Betty Crocker published this recipe in 1971, though similar versions had appeared in American cookbooks since the Depression. Ground beef was combined with uncooked rice, water, chopped onion, salt, celery salt, garlic powder, and pepper, then shaped into balls by rounded tablespoonfuls. The meatballs were arranged in a single layer in a baking dish without crowding. Tomato sauce mixed with water and Worcestershire sauce was poured over the meatballs, providing liquid that would steam the rice tender. The dish was covered tightly with aluminum foil to trap steam, then baked for 45 minutes before the foil was removed for a final 15 minutes. The rice absorbed the tomato sauce and meat juices, swelling into tender grains that stuck out charmingly from each meatball. This casserole made families smile while costing almost nothing, since rice stretched ground beef impressively far. A single pound of meat transformed into 6 generous servings. The playful presentation made children forget they were eating economical food. Oven porcupines represented Depression-era wisdom passed to the next generation. Zippy beef casserole lived up to its energetic name by combining ground beef with elbow macaroni and a tangy sauce that made ordinary ingredients taste exciting. Betty Crocker created this recipe for families who needed reliable weeknight meals that came together quickly. Ground beef was browned and drained thoroughly, then combined with cooked macaroni that had been boiled until just tender. Condensed cream of mushroom soup provided creamy base, while milk thinned it to proper consistency and catsup added tangy sweetness. Shredded cheddar cheese melted into the mixture, creating pockets of gooey richness, while chopped green pepper added color and slight crunch. Instant minced onion reconstituted in the liquid, providing aromatic depth without requiring chopping. Everything was combined in a casserole dish and topped with crushed potato chips. The chips created irresistible crunchy topping during the final 5 minutes of baking. The casserole baked covered for 40 minutes at 350 degrees, then uncovered briefly to crisp the chips. This combination of textures made every bite interesting, from creamy pasta to crunchy topping. The cost remained minimal since every ingredient was a pantry staple. The potato chip topping elevated the humble casserole into something children requested repeatedly. Foil-wrapped dinners turned individual portions into complete meals that cooked simultaneously in one oven, making them perfect for families whose members arrived home at different times. Betty Crocker introduced this technique during the 1960s, when aluminum foil became household staple. Round steak was cut into 1-inch pieces, then divided among 4 large sheets of heavy-duty foil alongside frozen peas, thinly sliced carrots, and quartered potatoes. Condensed cream of mushroom soup was mixed with dry onion soup mix to create savory gravy, then spooned over the meat and vegetables in each packet. The foil was folded and sealed securely to trap steam. Then the packets were placed on a baking sheet and baked for 50 minutes at 450 degrees. The high heat and trapped steam created tender meat and perfectly cooked vegetables without any stirring or monitoring. Each person opened their own steaming packet at the table, revealing a complete dinner that looked almost magical. Cherry tomatoes, added at the last moment, provided fresh brightness. This method eliminated pot watching and made cleanup effortless, since the foil packets were simply discarded. Each dinner was self-contained and portion-controlled, perfect for managing individual appetites and dietary needs. Connecticut beef supper combined beef stew meat with potatoes and a creamy sauce that tasted far more elegant than its simple preparation suggested. Betty Crocker named this casserole after Connecticut, though its appeal spread nationwide among families who appreciated hearty meals. Beef stew meat was browned in shortening with sliced onions until both developed deep golden color. Then water was added and the mixture simmered covered for 50 minutes. The partially cooked beef was transferred to a baking dish and topped with thinly sliced potatoes arranged in overlapping layers. Condensed cream of mushroom soup was combined with sour cream, milk, salt, and pepper to create luxurious sauce that was poured over the potatoes. Shredded cheddar cheese and crushed Wheaties cereal were sprinkled on top, creating a topping that became golden and crispy. The casserole baked for an hour and a half at 350 degrees. The result was incredibly tender beef beneath creamy potatoes with a crunchy, cheesy crust. This casserole fed 6 to 8 people generously, making it perfect for larger families. The cereal topping was an unexpected touch that added both texture and a subtle sweetness. Connecticut beef supper proved regional recipes could travel successfully across state lines. Round steak and ravioli brought Italian-American flavors into Betty Crocker's collection, combining tender beef with canned ravioli for a casserole that felt international and sophisticated. This recipe appeared during the 1970s when ethnic foods gained mainstream acceptance. Round steak was coated with seasoned flour, then browned in a skillet until deeply caramelized. The browned meat was placed in a baking dish and topped with spaghetti sauce that had been heated with the reserved flour mixture. The casserole was covered and baked for 45 minutes at 375 degrees while the meat tenderized. Zucchini cut lengthwise into halves was arranged around the meat along with canned tiny whole onions. Then canned cheese ravioli and sauce was spooned over everything. The casserole returned to the oven, covered for another 45 minutes until the vegetables were tender. This glorious combination of beef, pasta, and vegetables created a complete meal that needed only a crisp green salad alongside. The use of canned ravioli made this elaborate-looking dish accessible to home cooks who had never made fresh pasta. Round steak no ravioli proved convenience and quality could coexist peacefully. The layers of flavors suggested hours of preparation, though the actual work was minimal. 10 forgotten casseroles were completed, from oven porcupines to round steak and ravioli that brought the world to American tables. These Betty Crocker recipes proved that budget cooking meant creativity, not deprivation. 20 more await, each one a testament to American ingenuity in the kitchen. Beefsteak potato scallop transformed tough round steak into fork-tender supper through slow baking beneath layers of thinly sliced potatoes. This Betty Crocker recipe from 1971 understood that cheaper cuts of beef needed time and moisture to become palatable. Potatoes were the perfect vehicle for stretching expensive protein into meals that fed families generously. The round steak was cut into 1-inch cubes. Each piece was coated thoroughly in flour. The floured beef was browned in shortening until golden. The crust was sealed in moisture and added a rich flavor. Sliced onions were added to the heart skillet. They cooked until soft and translucent. The browned beef and onions were transferred to a casserole dish. They were sprinkled with additional flour, salt, pepper, thyme, and garlic salt. Water was poured over everything to provide braising liquid. The casserole was covered tightly. It baked for 45 to 60 minutes at 350 degrees. The beef became tender enough to cut with a fork. The oven temperature was then increased to 450 degrees. Thinly sliced potatoes were arranged in overlapping layers on top of the tender beef. They were sprinkled with salt and paprika for color and flavor. The casserole baked uncovered for about 30 minutes. The potatoes turned golden and tender. The potato slices absorbed the rich beef gravy from below. Barbecued lamb shank dinner brought less common protein to Betty Crocker's 1971 collection. It offered families an affordable alternative to more expensive beef cuts. Lamb shanks were among the cheapest cuts available at butcher counters. Many shoppers overlooked them. They didn't understand how to cook them properly. Betty Crocker's recipe solved this problem through slow braising. Tough, sinewy meat transformed into something remarkably tender. The lamb shanks were coated with flour seasoned with salt and pepper. They were browned thoroughly in shortening. Deep golden color developed on all sides. The browned shanks were placed in a Dutch oven. They were brushed generously with homemade barbecue sauce. The sauce was made from catsup, brown sugar, Worcestershire sauce, vinegar, red pepper sauce, minced garlic, dry mustard, and salt. This combination delivered sweet, tangy, and spicy elements. It complemented the rich lamb perfectly. Water was added to the pot. The shanks were covered tightly. They baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour. Fluffy rice and chicken combined condensed soup with raw rice to create a complete one-dish meal. The casserole practically cooked itself. Betty Crocker published this recipe in her 1971 Budget Casseroles collection. She understood that working women needed meals that required minimal hands-on time. The genius of this casserole lay in its simplicity. Ordinary ingredients created something that tasted carefully prepared. Condensed cream of mushroom soup was mixed with milk and a casserole dish. This created creamy base that would cook the rice and keep the chicken moist. Uncooked regular rice was stirred into the soup mixture. Canned mushroom stems and pieces were added. They provided texture and earthy flavor. Half of a dry onion soup mix envelope was sprinkled over the rice. This provided aromatic depth and savory seasoning. No chopping or measuring of fresh ingredients was needed. Chicken breast halves were placed skin side up on top of the rice mixture. The remaining soup mixture was poured over the chicken breasts. The rest of the onion soup mix was sprinkled on top. Chili chicken casserole brought southwestern heat to Betty Crocker's 1971 collection. It combined chicken with pickled hot green chili peppers for a casserole that felt adventurous. This recipe appeared during an era when American families were beginning to explore spicier flavors. Mexican-inspired dishes were gaining mainstream acceptance. 16 ounces of medium egg noodles were cooked until tender and drained. Chopped onion was sautéed in butter until soft and fragrant. 3 cans of condensed cream of mushroom soup provided rich, creamy base. Canned pimiento was chopped and stirred in for sweet pepper flavor and bright red color. Finely chopped pickled hot green chili pepper was added carefully. The stems and seeds were removed first. The amount could be adjusted based on family heat tolerance. Some used 1 tablespoon for mild warmth. Others added 2 tablespoons for genuine heat that made foreheads perspire. Cut up cooked chicken or turkey was folded into the mixture. The meat could come from leftover roasted birds or from poached chicken breasts. Garden supper casserole transformed leftover meat and vegetables into a complete meal that honored thrift while delivering satisfaction. Betty Crocker published this recipe in her 1971 Budget Casseroles collection under the Versatile Vegetables section. The recipe was deliberately flexible. It encouraged cooks to use whatever vegetables and meat they had on hand. Nothing needed to go to waste. Soft bread cubes were tossed with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and melted butter. Half this mixture was spread in a greased 1-quart casserole. It created a savory base layer. Cooked peas or any other leftover vegetable were spread over the bread mixture. Chopped onion was cooked in butter until tender and translucent. Flour was blended into the butter to create a roux. The mixture was cooked until smooth and bubbly. Milk was stirred in gradually. The sauce was heated to boiling while being stirred constantly. 15 forgotten casseroles were completed, from beef steak potato scallop to garden supper that honored leftovers. These Betty Crocker recipes proved slow cooking created tenderness and layers built flavor. Economy meant creativity. 5 more await, each showing how simple techniques delivered restaurant results at home. Oven cheese fondue brought Swiss sophistication to American tables through a casserole that resembled the trendy fondue parties of the 1970s. Betty Crocker published this recipe in her 1971 Budget Casseroles collection. She understood that fondue was becoming fashionable. Not every family owned the special equipment required for traditional melted cheese fondue. This baked version delivered similar flavors without special pots or burners. Bread cubes were arranged in a greased casserole dish. They created a substantial base that would absorb the cheese custard. Shredded sharp cheddar or Swiss cheese was sprinkled generously over the bread. The cheese would melt and bind everything together during baking. Eggs were beaten with milk, salt, pepper, and dry mustard. This custard mixture was poured over the bread and cheese. The bread cubes soaked up the liquid immediately. Some cooks let the assembled casserole sit for 30 minutes before baking. This allowed the bread to soften completely and absorb maximum flavor. Cheese egg bake combined eggs with bread and cheese to create a casserole that worked for any meal of the day. Betty Crocker published this versatile recipe in her 1971 collection. It became particularly popular for Sunday brunches or light suppers when families wanted something satisfying but not heavy. Slices of bread were buttered and arranged in a greased baking pan. Some cooks used white bread for mild flavor. Others preferred whole wheat for heartier texture. Day-old bread worked perfectly since it absorbed the egg mixture better than fresh bread. The bread was cut into triangles or cubes depending on presentation preference. Shredded cheese was sprinkled generously between the bread layers. Eggs were whisked thoroughly with milk, salt, pepper, and prepared mustard. Others included finely minced onion for aromatic depth. The egg mixture was poured slowly over the bread and cheese. The bread soaked up the liquid gradually. The casserole could be assembled and refrigerated overnight. This allowed the bread to absorb maximum flavor. It also made morning preparation effortless for brunch gatherings. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes. It emerged puffed and golden with crispy edges. The center stayed soft and custard-like. The cheese melted into gooey pockets throughout. This casserole fed 6 people easily. It cost very little to prepare. The ingredients were basic staples. Cheese egg bake represented the kind of flexible, forgiving recipe that suited busy families perfectly. Pizza potatoes brought beloved pizza flavors to the casserole format through a clever combination of sliced potatoes, ground beef, and Italian seasonings. Betty Crocker created this recipe during the 1970s when pizza was becoming America's favorite food. Ground beef was browned thoroughly and drained of excess fat. Italian seasoning, garlic powder, and salt were stirred into the meat. These seasonings mimicked the flavors found in pizza sauce and sausage. Canned tomato sauce was added to create a rich, savory mixture. Sliced potatoes were arranged in a greased casserole dish. They replaced the traditional pizza crust. The seasoned meat and tomato mixture was spooned over the potatoes. It was spread evenly to cover all the slices. Shredded mozzarella cheese was sprinkled generously on top. The casserole was covered and baked at 375 degrees for about 45 minutes. The potatoes cooked tender while absorbing the flavorful meat sauce. During the final 10 minutes, the cover was removed. This allowed the cheese to brown slightly and bubble appetizingly. Some families added their favorite pizza toppings before baking. Pizza potatoes satisfied pizza cravings while feeding families on a tight budget. Children loved the familiar flavors. Parents appreciated the economy and nutrition that potatoes provided. Green bean casserole became an American icon through Betty Crocker's simplified version that appeared in her 1971 recipe collection. The dish combined canned green beans with cream of mushroom soup and French fried onions. Canned green beans were drained thoroughly to remove excess liquid. They were combined with condensed cream of mushroom soup straight from the can. Milk was added to thin the soup slightly. This created a creamy sauce that coated every bean. Salt and pepper seasoned the mixture according to taste. The bean mixture was spooned into a casserole dish. Half of a can of French fried onions was stirred in. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for about 25 minutes. It heated through completely and began bubbling around the edges. The remaining French fried onions were sprinkled on top. The finished casserole emerged with a crispy onion topping over creamy green beans. Green bean casserole represented the democratization of cooking. Anyone could make it successfully. Everyone loved eating it. It proved that simple could still mean delicious and satisfying. Chicken Gloria casserole elevated ordinary chicken breasts into something elegant through a combination of cream sauce, cheese, and breadcrumbs. Betty Crocker published this recipe during the 1960s. It became popular for special occasions when families wanted impressive results without restaurant prices. Chicken breast halves were dredged in flour seasoned with salt and pepper. They were browned in butter until golden on both sides. The browned chicken was arranged in a baking dish. This created the foundation for the layers that would follow. Condensed cream of chicken soup was combined with sour cream. This created a luxuriously rich sauce. Some cooks added a splash of white wine or chicken broth to thin it slightly. The sauce was poured over the chicken breasts. It pooled around them in the dish. Shredded cheddar or Swiss cheese was sprinkled generously over the sauce-covered chicken. The cheese would melt during baking and create gooey richness. Breadcrumbs were mixed with melted butter. This mixture was sprinkled on top. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes. The chicken cooked through completely while staying moist in the creamy environment. The breadcrumb topping became beautifully golden and crunchy. The cheese melted into the sauce. This casserole looked restaurant quality when served. The golden topping and creamy sauce impressed guests. Chicken Gloria represented aspirational cooking. Families could create dishes that looked and tasted expensive. The casserole proved that Betty Crocker understood both economy and elegance. Simple techniques delivered impressive results every time. 20 forgotten casseroles were completed, from oven cheese fondue to chicken Gloria, that brought elegance home. These Betty Crocker recipes proved sophistication didn't require expense. Canned goods became gourmet through thoughtful combinations. 10 more await, each showing how American ingenuity conquered both budgets and dinner tables. King Ranch Chicken Casserole brought Tex-Mex flavors to Betty Crocker's collection during the 1960s, when Southwestern cuisine was gaining popularity across America. The name referenced the legendary King Ranch, one of the largest cattle ranches in America. This association gave the humble casserole an air of authenticity and regional pride. The casserole began with layers of corn tortillas torn into pieces. They replaced traditional pasta or rice as the starch component. The tortillas would soften during baking and absorb the flavorful sauce. Cooked chicken was shredded or cut into bite-sized pieces. Leftover roasted chicken worked perfectly. Poached chicken breasts were another economical option. This mixture created sauce that was simultaneously creamy and tangy. Chili powder and cumin added authentic Southwestern seasoning. The spices could be adjusted according to family heat tolerance. The casserole was assembled in layers. Shredded cheddar cheese was sprinkled generously. The layers were repeated once more. This created distinct strata that looked impressive when served. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes. It emerged bubbly with melted cheese on top. The tortillas became soft and absorbed the sauce completely. The flavors melded together beautifully. The casserole proved that bold, spicy food could come from ordinary home kitchens using everyday ingredients and straightforward techniques that anyone could master successfully. Chicken custard casserole appeared in Betty Crocker's 1969 cookbook as an unusual combination that puzzled modern cooks but made perfect sense to Depression-era sensibilities. This recipe stretched expensive chicken by suspending it in savory custard that increased volume while adding protein and richness. The technique came from an era when every ingredient needed to work hard and nothing could be wasted. Eggs were affordable. Milk was plentiful. Together they extended chicken into a dish that fed more people than the chicken alone could have managed. The chicken could come from leftover roasted birds or from poached chicken breasts. Some cooks used a combination of light and dark meat for more complex flavor. The chicken was seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of poultry seasoning or dried herbs. Eggs were beaten thoroughly with milk to create a custard base. The ratio was typically 4 eggs to 2 cups of milk. This created a custard that would set firmly during baking without becoming rubbery. Salt and pepper seasoned the custard. Some cooks added a dash of nutmeg or a sprinkle of dried parsley for subtle complexity. The egg mixture was poured slowly over the chicken pieces. The liquid settled around and between the meat. Soft breadcrumbs were sometimes sprinkled on top. They would absorb moisture and create a slightly crispy surface. Small pats of butter dotted over the breadcrumbs added richness and helped with browning. The casserole baked in a moderate oven at 325 degrees for about 45 minutes. It was done when a knife inserted in the center came out clean. The custard puffed slightly during baking like a souffle. It set into a firm but tender texture that sliced cleanly. The chicken pieces were suspended throughout like jewels in a golden setting. This casserole was served hot from the oven. It deflated slightly as it cooled but maintained its structure. The flavor was mild and comforting rather than bold. The texture was unusual but pleasant. Families eating this casserole appreciated how far a small amount of chicken could stretch. The cost was minimal since eggs and milk were among the cheapest protein sources available during the 1960s. Cheeseburger casserole transformed America's favorite sandwich into a family-sized, baked dish that delivered all the beloved flavors without the individual assembly. Betty Crocker created this recipe during the 1970s when fast food was reshaping American eating habits. Not every family could afford frequent restaurant meals. This casserole brought drive-through flavors home for a fraction of the cost. Children who loved cheeseburgers embraced this casserole enthusiastically. Parents appreciated the economy and the built-in vegetables that traditional burgers often lacked. Ground beef was browned thoroughly and drained of excess fat. Chopped onion was cooked with the meat until soft and translucent. The mixture was seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of Worcestershire sauce that added depth. Ketchup and mustard were stirred in. These condiments provided the signature cheeseburger tang. Some cooks added a spoonful of pickle relish for authentic burger flavor. Cooked egg noodles or elbow macaroni provided the starch component. The pasta was mixed with the seasoned beef. Condensed tomato soup or cheese soup created creamy binding sauce. Some recipes used a combination of both soups for more complex flavor. Diced tomatoes added freshness and acidity. Shredded cheddar cheese was folded throughout the mixture. The combined mixture was spooned into a greased casserole dish. More shredded cheese was sprinkled generously on top. This would melt into a gooey layer that mimicked melted cheese on burgers. Some cooks added sesame seeds on top for visual authenticity. Crushed crackers mixed with melted butter created a topping that suggested burger buns. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes. It heated through completely, and the cheese melted into stretchy goodness. The top became golden and slightly crispy. The interior stayed creamy and rich. Some families served it with pickle slices on the side. Others offered ketchup and mustard at the table for individual customization. This casserole cost very little to prepare. Ground beef was affordable. Pasta and cheese were pantry staples. The familiar flavors meant even picky eaters accepted it willingly. Cheeseburger casserole represented the Americanization of casserole cooking. Traditional European baked dishes were reimagined through the lens of American fast food culture. The result was something uniquely American that satisfied families completely. Wild rice and turkey casserole elevated leftover holiday turkey into something elegant through the addition of wild rice. Wild rice was more expensive than regular rice. Using it transformed ordinary leftovers into something that felt intentional rather than improvised. The nutty flavor and chewy texture of wild rice. Some cooks used a mixture of wild rice and regular rice to stretch the expensive ingredient further. Condensed cream of mushroom soup provided creamy base. Milk was stirred in to thin the soup to proper consistency. Chopped onion added aromatic depth. Some recipes included chopped celery for crunch and fresh flavor. Salt and pepper seasoned the mixture according to taste. Casserole baked at 350 degrees for about 35 minutes. It heated through completely and began bubbling around the edges. The topping became golden and crispy if nuts or breadcrumbs were used. The wild rice absorbed additional liquid during baking. It became tender while maintaining its distinctive chewy texture. Quick Cheeseburger Bake used Bisquick baking mix to create an impossibly easy casserole that formed its own crust. Ground beef was browned thoroughly and drained. Chopped onion was cooked with the meat until soft. The mixture was seasoned with salt and pepper. It was spread evenly in a greased pie pan or baking dish. This formed the base layer. Shredded cheddar cheese was sprinkled over the meat. The cheese would melt during baking and create gooey pockets throughout. The casserole baked at 400 degrees for about 25 minutes. It was done when the top turned golden brown and a knife inserted in the center came out clean. The crust on the bottom was firm enough to cut cleanly. The middle was soft but set. The top developed a slight golden color. This casserole was served hot, cut into wedges like a pie. Ketchup and mustard on the side completed the cheeseburger experience. 25 forgotten casseroles were completed, from King Ranch chicken to quick cheeseburger bake that seemed impossibly easy. These Betty Crocker recipes proved innovation conquered both effort and expense. Convenience products delivered homemade satisfaction. 5 more await, each showing how American cooking evolved through decades of creative solutions. Cowboy casserole brought Western frontier spirit to dinner tables through a hearty combination of ground beef. Ground beef was browned thoroughly in a large skillet. Excess fat was drained off. The cooked meat was combined with canned baked beans that provided sweetness and additional protein. Barbecue sauce was stirred in for tangy, smoky flavor. Some recipes included chopped onion and bell pepper for added vegetables. The mixture was heated until bubbling. It was transferred to a greased baking dish while still hot. Bisquick baking mix was combined with milk and sometimes shredded cheddar cheese to create biscuit dough. The dough was stirred just until combined. Casserole baked at 425 degrees for about 20 minutes. The biscuits rose and became golden brown. Some cooks brushed the biscuit tops with melted butter. This created golden, shiny surfaces during baking. Some families added a can of corn or green beans to the meat mixture. This increased the vegetable content and stretched the dish further. This casserole fed families generously for very little cost. Ground beef was affordable. Canned beans cost pennies. Bisquick was a pantry staple. The entire meal came together quickly. Most of the baking time was hands-off. Cowboy casserole represented American resourcefulness. Simple ingredients combined thoughtfully created satisfaction. The Western theme added fun to practical cooking. Families felt connected to pioneer heritage while eating economical weeknight dinners in modern suburban homes far from any frontier. Cheese sandwich casserole transformed ordinary cheese sandwiches into elegant brunch dish through the addition of savory custard that bound everything together. This recipe appeared in Betty Crocker's picture cookbook from 1950. It represented an era when simple ingredients were elevated through thoughtful technique rather than expensive additions. The concept seemed unusual to modern cooks. Sandwiches were typically eaten by hand, not baked in casseroles. Yet this preparation made perfect sense to cooks who understood that bread, cheese, and eggs formed the foundation of countless European dishes from French toast to strata. 12 slices of white bread were used to form sandwiches with sharp cheddar cheese slices. The sandwiches were arranged upright in a greased baking dish. They stood on edge like books on a shelf rather than lying flat. This arrangement allowed the custard to flow between them and created an impressive presentation when served. Some cooks buttered the bread before assembly. This added richness and prevented sogginess. Eggs were beaten thoroughly with milk to create custard base. The typical ratio was 4 eggs to 2½ cups of milk. Salt, pepper, and dry mustard seasoned the mixture. The mustard was essential. It added subtle tang that brightened the rich eggs and cheese. Some cooks included a pinch of cayenne pepper for gentle heat. The custard was poured slowly over the sandwiches. The bread absorbed the liquid gradually. The casserole needed to sit for at least 30 minutes before baking. Some cooks assembled it the night before and refrigerated it overnight. This allowed maximum absorption and made morning preparation effortless. Curried tuna casserole brought exotic spices to Betty Crocker's 1965 Dinner in a Dish cookbook. This recipe represented American curiosity about international flavors during the post-war era. Curry powder was becoming more available in mainstream grocery stores. Home cooks were beginning to experiment with spices beyond salt and pepper. This casserole made curry approachable by pairing it with familiar ingredients like canned tuna and rice. The result was adventurous enough to feel exciting, but not so foreign that conservative eaters rejected it completely. Butter was browned in a small skillet with curry powder. This crucial step bloomed the spices and released their aromatic oil. The mixture was combined with condensed cream of mushroom soup and milk. The curry-flavored soup became the creamy sauce that bound the casserole together. The amount of curry powder could be adjusted according to family preferences. Some used 1 teaspoon for mild warmth. Others added 2 teaspoons for bolder flavor. Drained canned tuna was flaked and combined with cooked rice. Rice had been prepared according to package directions. Some cooks used chicken broth instead of water for extra flavor. Chopped onions added aromatic depth. The tuna and rice mixture was folded into the curried soup. Spanish rice casserole brought Tex-Mex flavors to Betty Crocker's 1950s cookbook collection. This dish combined ground beef with rice and tomatoes for a one-pot meal that satisfied completely. The name suggested international sophistication, though the recipe was thoroughly American in its approach. Spanish rice had been popular in the Southwest for generations. Betty Crocker's version made it accessible to families across the entire country. No special ingredients or techniques were required. Everything came from standard grocery stores and home kitchens. Ground beef was browned thoroughly in a large skillet. Chopped onion and bell pepper were added. They cooked until soft and fragrant. The vegetables added sweetness and color. Some cooks added minced garlic during the final minute of cooking. The mixture was seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes chili powder for extra heat. Uncooked regular rice was stirred into the beef mixture. It was cooked briefly in the meat drippings. This toasted the rice slightly and added nutty flavor. Canned tomatoes were added along with tomato sauce or tomato juice. The liquid needed to be enough to cook the rice properly. The typical ratio was 2 cups of liquid for every cup of rice. The mixture was transferred to a casserole dish. Some cooks kept everything in an oven-proof skillet. This eliminated extra dishes and simplified cleanup. The casserole was covered tightly with foil or a lid. Steam needed to be trapped inside to cook the rice tender. The dish baked at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes. Chicken. Broccoli and rice casserole combined protein, vegetables, and starch into the ultimate one-dish meal that Betty Crocker promoted during the 1980s. This casserole appeared in her casserole cookbook from 1981. It represented the culmination of decades of American casserole evolution. Earlier recipes had focused on economy and convenience. This version added nutrition and balance. Fresh or frozen broccoli provided vitamins and fiber. The green vegetable made the dish more complete and health-conscious. Chicken breasts were cut into bite-sized pieces. Some cooks used leftover cooked chicken. Others started with raw chicken that would cook during baking. Fresh broccoli florets were cut into small pieces. Frozen broccoli worked equally well and eliminated prep work. The broccoli could be used frozen without thawing. It would cook perfectly during the baking time. Cooked rice formed the starchy base. Some cooks used white rice for mild flavor. Others preferred brown rice for added nutrition and nutty taste. The rice was combined with condensed cream of chicken soup and milk. This created creamy sauce that bound everything together. Shredded cheddar cheese was stirred in. It melted during baking and added richness. The chicken pieces and broccoli were folded into the rice mixture. Everything was combined gently. The mixture was spooned into a greased casserole dish. More shredded cheese was sprinkled on top. This created a golden, bubbly surface during baking. Some cooks added crushed crackers mixed with melted butter over the cheese. This provided extra crunch and visual appeal. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes if using raw chicken. It baked for only 25 minutes if using pre-cooked chicken. The dish was done when the chicken cooked through and the casserole bubbled around the edges. The cheese on top melted and became slightly golden. This casserole represented complete nutrition in one dish. Protein came from chicken and cheese. Vegetables provided vitamins and fiber. Rice offered energy and substance. Busy families appreciated having everything combined. One dish meant less cleanup. The casserole could be assembled ahead and refrigerated until baking time. This made weeknight dinners manageable even with demanding schedules. Chicken, broccoli, and rice casserole showed how American casseroles had evolved from the Depression-era economy to modern balanced nutrition while maintaining the convenience that made them popular originally. 30 forgotten Betty Crocker casseroles that fed America through decades when budgets were tight and time was precious. These one-dish meals transformed canned soups and ground beef into dinners that brought families together around tables every single night. From salmon noodles Romanoff to chicken and broccoli, each casserole represented economy, convenience, and the quiet dignity of home cooking. Betty Crocker understood that feeding families well never required expensive ingredients or complicated techniques. Simple combinations delivered satisfaction every time. Smash the hype button if you remember when casseroles meant survival, when one dish fed everyone, and when America's dinner tables proved that thrift and love could exist on the same plate.